Welcome into Five Guys on the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Today we are appropriately starting at about 3:05. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick. And at Five Reasons Sports, I got Alex Donno. You can follow him at Alex Donno. I want to tell you about our sponsor before we get started. We're going to talk a little Heat and Dolphins today. Prize Picks, use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down $5. You get $50 to play right away. Again, it's prizepicks.com, Google Play Store, or the Apple App Store. You can play across the sports spectrum. I'm going to answer two questions here. One, is it legal in Florida? Yes, it came back to the state of Florida. Two, can you play the way you used to play? Pretty much. You can play up to 6 players just as you used to. It's just a little bit of a tweak where you're playing against others in your group instead of playing against Prize Picks directly. But honestly, I'm not supposed to say this. It really makes no difference. It's the same. So check out prizepicks.com, go to Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Put down your $5 and use the code 5. That's the important thing. We actually recommend you put down 10, but that's a whole nother story. Use the code 5 to get the bonus. That helps us continue to provide content if you want a reason to do it. That's one reason to do it. And then you get your $50 and away you go. All right, let's get to it, Alex. We got a couple of stories. One is simmer down a little bit just because Dolphins have been out of the news since the Chris Greer excuse-making press conference. Just before we go further, because we're probably going to lean more into Jimmy on this because there's new news on that today. What did you think of Greer's presser?
Well, I guess my first question is, why does he still have a job? That's
Yeah.
my that's the first thing that I wonder. And I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of backtracking and a lot of placating happening with Tyreek Hill. I mean, I talked to someone about this morning that still thinks there's maybe a good chance he's not on the Dolphins next year, but it seems like the Dolphins are kind of maybe hedging their bets and trying to make him happy and mend fences in the meantime.
It seems like that too. But here's my issue with these situations. We'll get into the Heat in a second. Is that once you've established a certain way of doing things of some leniency, it's very hard to go the other direction. So, when the Tyreek situation with Greer, it's like, okay, and with McDaniel acknowledging, like, I heard from someone who's familiar with the situation who basically said these things should have been addressed 6, 7, 8 weeks into the season. And they sort of hoped it would self-correct, and then it didn't self-correct, and then you're dealing with the Tua stuff, him not playing, and that takes precedence, and they just let the whole thing slide. So I think where we're at right now with them is that I'm a McDaniel fan in terms of personality and other things he brings to the table. There clearly are things he needs to clean up. I mean, one of the things he needs to clean up is getting plays in on time, some in-game play calling, that kind of stuff. But the other thing now is it's very hard to go from the nice guy to the hard ass.
Yeah.
And he may have gone too far down the nice guy route. And I don't know that it's in his personality. It's great to have a relief from Brian Flores, but now if you win, then that continues, right? If you win big, then the players coach thing works. But once you're not winning big and you feel like you need to set additional guidelines, that's problematic. And I think he's going to run into trouble. It feels a little bit lame ducky to me going into this season for him because I think he's going to have a problem establishing it. On the Jimmy side and on the Heat side, and I know some of this stuff is going back and forth here. Chris Haynes had a report on Le Batard's show, which I can tell you the Heat dispute. I mean, they came out right away and disputed it. That that the only flights involved here. He reported basically that Jimmy took 5 flights separate from the team, and 4 were related to his father's passing and various situations with his father. I do know some of them were related to that. But the way it's characterized that like that's all this was, it's not. I mean, Jimmy's been staying at separate hotels for a while. There's a lot of other things behind the scenes. I haven't gotten the Heat to pin down the exact number of flights, but I can tell you that they don't agree with the tone of the report that they didn't make a ton of concessions for Jimmy. Their feeling is they made more concessions for Jimmy than they've made for any other player they have. And I've said this over and over.
I believe it.
Right? For Shaq, for Dwayne, for Bron, for Bosch, for Dragic, for Timmy, for Zoe, for all their Hall of Famers and near Hall of Famers, they made more concessions for Jimmy, and it was worth it. Like they understood who they were getting, and that he had a certain routine, and they've gone along with it. Now they felt it got kind of worse when Kyle got there. People are talking about the first playoff run. Remember, they were in the bubble, like they were all together, like they had Jimmy started a coffee business there. Like the players were all there was nowhere else to go. You know what I'm saying? Like there wasn't these other. So it kind of feels like between getting Kyle, who really didn't buy into the Heat culture thing from minute one, and then you have Jimmy sort of to his own devices, and with Kyle, that the Heat started just saying, okay, you don't want to do media, you don't want to do media. You don't want to go to this community event, you don't have to do this community event. Like there are just things with Jimmy like we just took for granted. Like like everybody made a big deal about him missing the Christmas party at Pat's house this year. I think he's missed it 4 times from what I was told.
Right.
It just again, it only becomes an issue when you have the kind of dispute they're having now over a contract extension. At the time, the Heat were okay, sort of saying, look, as long as he shows up and plays and he shows up in the playoffs, but then they kind of scaled it back where they're like, all right, now he's 35 or turning 35. We need to see this more consistently in the regular season. We need him to play more. We need to be in a position where we're not going to be in the play-in, where he has to dig us out, because you saw what happened last year. He literally got hurt in a play-in game. They don't want to play the play-in game again. Like they don't want to be in that spot where it's a miracle at the end. So they basically asked him to prove it, and he doesn't like that they asked him to prove it. And that is the core of this. Like everything else, his role, what he felt about certain other players, whether he wanted Max Strus back, like that is all secondary. Yeah. They decided they wanted to make it was basically a prove it year for them this year, and his fallback was he just stops in. They felt that was enough to deal with it after the season. Obviously, he did not, and that's where we're at. But I think with Jimmy, the problem with a player like him, and when you deal with this with Tyreek too, but in the NFL, it's easier to get out of the contracts. But I think the thing is, once you start to let things go, and I think this is the parallel between the two organizations, it's very hard. The player starts to expect it. And not only that, I want to go to the Alex, you weigh on this. It's not just that, but the other players in the teams see it and are like, wait a second. He can do that. Why can't I? Yes, he's the star, but he's not being held to any expectations whatsoever. And I think that's what the Heat were afraid of this year, that this was bleeding into the locker room.
And I think that, to take it back to Tyreek for a second, I feel like that's an even bigger problem with Tyreek, because I feel like the rest of the Heat roster is probably a little bit more mature, and it's a stronger organization where it's like an example set by, one superstar or one diva, whatever you want to call it, is probably going to rub off on the rest of the locker room less, but it's still an issue. I think it's a bigger issue with the Dolphins. Not to say that Tyreek is necessarily more toxic than Jimmy, because I look at this, Ethan, from the perspective of a Miami Heat fan, which I am for virtually my entire life since the franchise has been around. I just want this saga to end. Like I'm really tired. I'm really getting tired of every single day getting push notifications about, oh, this is going on with Jimmy, and maybe this is the trading partner and that. It's just so distracting, and this is nothing I ever really expected to see in the context of the Miami Heat, because that organization is usually immune to sagas like this, not to be held hostage by a player. Not to say it's never happened before. I mean, the late stages of LeBron in Miami and what happened with Dwayne. It's not to say it's Hassan Whiteside. There's been some things over the years, but this is still unfamiliar territory to be in. And it's gotten to a point where, and I will wish no ill will towards Jimmy, but I don't want this on my team anymore. I just want to be able to move on from all of this. And it's nothing personal. I just want the drama to be over, because I feel like Heat basketball is at its best when we can just operate in silence. And this situation is not allowing us to do it. It just doesn't feel like something that this feels more like a New York Knicks situation than something the Miami Heat should be involved in.
Like Isaiah Thomas, New York Knicks. I just laughing because this comment comes in from JMill845. This Jimmy situation is Chris Greer's fault. It sounds like what you're saying is like there's an old Motley Crue song, don't go away mad, just go away. And I kind of feel like that's where a lot of Heat fans are right now. And now here's the thing that's weird to me is that, and someone in the Heat made this point today, and I agree with this. Like these leverage plays that are going back and forth, none of it is suiting his purpose to get what he wants. It feels like this is all a public relations battle now. Like that essentially he doesn't like, or his people don't like the fact that he's been portrayed a certain way now, which again has flipped this from when we were doing polling 2 weeks ago before the New Orleans game. Okay, before the first. Okay, when he was still sick. Okay, and again, now I heard he was sick too. I believe he was sick, but then the Heat also, not just the Tim Hardaway report about him being at Prime 112, which I haven't gotten anybody to dispute that. And I know people at Prime 112, and they say, yes, he was there.
Oh
Okay, that's the
wow,
first thing. There's also a report that he was at Domino Park during one of the games too. Okay,
I
so
heard about that. Yeah.
this is how sick was he? I don't know. He wouldn't see the Heat doctors. So again, you start to put these pieces together, and
Mm.
then we're at this point, and I think fans are, even without everything being revealed, and people, the Heat are not leaking a lot of this stuff. Some, yes, okay, we find out from being around, but a lot of this, yes, it does increase
That's a
my
great
increase. We just
comment.
had our best download month ever, Van, on
Yeah,
Five on the Floor,
let's
ever.
go.
5 years of it. So keep this going for a little longer. But no, but the thing is, like, there's all these. The Heat don't have any purpose to leak this because their end game is to get the maximum from either the player, which it doesn't appear they're going to get now, or for the player, right, in a
Mm.
trade. That is
Yeah.
their goal. It should be Jimmy's goal too. If Jimmy wants out of here, then play the good soldier for just a little bit here.
Yeah,
That
few months.
potentially increases the market and allows the Heat
Yeah.
to make a trade that they're comfortable with. He's not doing that. But this idea of like playing the back and forth and using Shams, then I don't think they're using Shams. Well, I know Bernie's not. He doesn't like Shams. That's true. He does not like Shams. There are others in his camp who are probably speaking to Shams. Okay, but the Haynes thing today and all that, like, this is not doing any good. Like, I see this in the comment here about how Haynes said there were only 5 flights and 3 were to see his father. I actually think he said 4. Um, I don't even think the flights was the big issue, but people are going back at it as if the Heat leaked that. I don't think the Heat leaked that. They don't want that out there. They don't want to. They don't want to say basically that to another team, you're going to trade for this guy. And he's going to take separate flights. He's going to do all this. And
Mm.
no, they want to make
Yeah.
it seem like things were pretty good, but they had to
Yeah.
speak to the league. You understand? Once the Players Association was going to file a grievance, which to this point has not been filed, but once they started preparing a grievance, then the Heat are contacted by the league because this is messy for them. And so the Heat filed, Hardaway's right about that. They filed, I don't know if it was 10 pages, he said a 10-page report to the league, and various issues that led to the suspension were in there, and somebody leaked it. It does not benefit the Heat to leak that, but it's at the league office now. It literally can be anybody in the league office or anybody in the league office who talks to an agent or talks to a player, okay, or talks to another team. I mean, if you're Phoenix, why wouldn't you want it out there? Because
Yeah.
ideally, okay, you're trying to scare off other teams from wanting Jimmy, right? So that the Heat are forced to
Right.
trade him to you. Who does it benefit for that to have leaked yesterday? It doesn't benefit the Heat.
Great
It
point.
might benefit Jimmy. It
Yeah.
might benefit Phoenix. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, you have to have an acknowledgement um, of where this stuff is coming from. All right, and that's and who it benefits. And at this point, I don't think that these leverage plays back and forth benefit everybody. Jimmy's changed his mind 12
No.
times already. Okay, trade me anywhere but Miami. No, pretty much clear. It's just Phoenix, right? Get me stars. Okay, I really wanted them to keep all the role players. Run it back as many times as they can. Like, there's just all these contradictions at this point. He said a million times that he wants somebody else to step up. He doesn't care about scoring. His people are putting it out there that they were upset about the change in the offense that was giving him less of a role. I mean, which is it? This is what it is. He wanted his money.
Yeah.
End of story. He wanted his money. They didn't want to give it to him. You can argue whether that's the right decision. I understand that argument from Jimmy's side. Okay, I get it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I get it. Okay. But quitting on the team midseason was not going to get you money from anybody. So that's kind of where it's at. And I think when you heard his teammates' comments, from the road trip, so you can tell they're kind of sick of the circus now, and I don't blame them. And that's kind of where it's at.
I mean,
You
isn't there,
what?
isn't there, and there's been for his entire career, there's always an expiration date with harmony when it comes to Jimmy Butler. I mean, this is not, this is not anything new that the Heat organization is suddenly experiencing. I mean, there's going to be some good, and the Heat have probably stretched out a longer honeymoon with Jimmy than anywhere else he's been, but there seems to be an expiration date for the harmony that you're not, Jimmy
Mhm.
is not a lifer for any of the teams he's been on. You can only keep him content for so long.
Well, that's the thing, and they knew that when they got him.
Yeah.
So 5.5 years. They dated the toxic girlfriend.
Yeah.
provided a lot of good times.
Right. It works out for a while, but then
a lot of us have been there, but then it's spectacularly, some took it all the way to marriage, you
Mhm.
know. But eventually there's an explosion, and I'm just gonna leave it right there. Okay. You play with fire and eventually you get burnt and the whole house burns with it. They're trying to make sure the house doesn't get burnt. That's basically what they're trying to do. They're trying to contain the flames. Just keep it in the garage, okay? And let's keep it in the garage for now. And it doesn't seem like Jimmy was willing to do that. And just wait till the end of the season, opt in, opt out, whatever it is you're going to do. And we're going to on Five on the Floor, we'll get into the whole opt in thing and how that plays out. But Greg and I already did a podcast about how we thought that might be Jimmy's leverage play, and we see it. He's using it. He doesn't have a whole lot left, but that is one he can use, is make it uncomfortable for an entire season and a half. If you want to put pressure on the Heat to trade him. Anyway, Alex and I'll be back in a second. Well, we won't be, but we're right here. Better Edge. They're here for you right now. You can bet everything at Better Edge. This is a marketplace. You're not betting against the book. That's why there is no VIG. Okay, that's how this plays out. And you know what VIG is? That's basically money you're giving to the house for free. That place in Hollywood, you got to pay VIG. You don't have to pay VIG here. You can also find the line that you want. So make sure that you check it out again. You can see all the NBA plays there. You can see orders come in throughout the day. They also do have the props there as well if you want to play those. And of course, we got the big games coming up in the NFL all weekend long. Hopefully, most are better than 5 of the 6 games were this previous weekend. We basically got one decent game, but you can see the lines are fairly big on some of them. So again, you can play the markets. You can see 22 orders already on that Washington-Detroit game. Some of those, excuse me, have different lines. Also play. Sorry about that. It's getting overcalled. The competitions as well. Again, $20 you get for free, 20 bucks if you use the code 5RSN. All right. Let's cycle back to the Dolphins here real quick, but let's get to a couple of the comments. Jimmy is the definition of a mercenary. Van Lee says, I mean, 5.5 years is a long time.
That's not I wouldn't call that a mercenary.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at historically Heat stars, right? I mean, Dwayne obviously came back and had a long stay before. What was it? He left in 16, so he was here 13 years before that. Shaq was less than Jimmy. Dragic about the same. Timmy about the same. Zoe was longer, but only if you include his second run.
Right.
And Braun was 4. Bosch would have been longer if he'd been able to play, but he was basically 6. So it's not a short stay for Jimmy.
You know why I wouldn't call him a mercenary? Because like, to me, a mercenary is someone that you never really feel like he was yours. In a weird way, I feel more like that about LeBron, where it always felt like he was bigger than the organization, in like his way, right? I mean, probably the only organization that really felt like LeBron was ours was Cleveland because of the whole Ohio tie-in and drafting him and stuff. But he felt like more of a mercenary because, to give Jimmy some credit for most of his tenure in Miami, I really felt like for a while he was the embodiment of the Miami Heat franchise. And I really felt like he was ours. Like, I haven't felt like that about every player that's come through here. But with Jimmy, I wouldn't call him a mercenary for that reason, because for me, he was really synonymous with the Miami Heat for a while.
He was, and in personality and attitude too. The timing in which he came, like the Heat were, and this is the part that I understand Jimmy's perspective. So we go through all these things, and I say he doesn't make sense on this. He doesn't make sense on this. He's contradicting himself on this. He dug them out of the dirt. I'm never going to argue otherwise. He dug and he dragged them, to 2 finals. He did. All right. I'm gonna eternally give him credit for that, which is why I have him as the 3rd most important player in their history. Okay. And, right ahead of Zoe, although I'm starting to rethink this by the way it's ending here, because at least Zoe came back and ended better. That's never going to happen for Jimmy. Because look, the first time around, Zoe, it didn't end well. Mickey we talk about planes. Mickey and the team, they gave him a plane to come back from the Olympics to go see the birth of his child. And then right after that, Zoe turned on them. And I was at the Zoe Summer Groove where he did it publicly. It was not pretty at the time prior to his trade. He came back. This is the only situation. Bron, Dwayne, Bosch, Zoe, they all end badly for a variety of reasons. This is the only one I don't think will ever be patched because of the way that Jimmy's handling it on the way out the door. It's above and beyond. But the one thing I do agree with, he dragged them out of where he was. He feels he should be compensated for that. They feel they've already compensated him for that.
Yeah.
because they gave him the extension
You
once
know,
already.
I was actually I was surprised. I was watching a recent Inside the NBA, and I was kind of expecting Shaq to have like more of a pro player stance on this, but he was
Yes,
basically
yes.
saying like that the Miami Heat don't owe him for past performance, right? Basically saying like nobody owes you a new deal based on what you've already done. Like you owe a player a new deal based on what you think they're going to do during the terms of that new deal. I mean, I think I was a little bit surprised to see
Mm-hmm.
Shaq take that basically anti Jimmy stance, like only knowing, given, you would expect a
Well,
former,
how about Timmy? How
yeah,
about Timmy? I mentioned
yeah,
that one.
yeah,
Nobody battled with Pat more than Tim. Trust me, I was there
yeah,
for
that's
all of
right.
it. Okay, Zoe was. I don't want to the mouthpiece basically for Pat. He sounded like Pat. Adversity introduces a man to himself. He used all of Pat's phrases. He is the Pat guy. Zoe is more than anybody in that organization. He's the one that never speaks ill of Pat. Tim spoke ill of Pat all the time, while he was playing, after he was playing. And here's Tim, who's been their strongest advocate publicly. I can tell you the team's not telling him to do that because Timmy wouldn't listen if they told him. Okay. So that's his perspective on this. And so that's kind of where it's at. So
Yeah,
I think right now where they're at, and I know we did more Heat than Dolphins, but there is more fresher stuff today.
sure. Oh
At
yeah,
21, Alex is
absolutely.
saying this: the Heat leaking bullshit about Jimmy is sickening, and I keep saying it. It does not benefit them to leak. Those who
Yeah,
are only pro Jimmy on this are not thinking logically about who benefits what. How does it benefit the Heat to leak things about Jimmy when they're trying to get the best possible return for him?
right.
Use your brain,
Doesn't make sense.
okay?
Yeah,
It doesn't make sense, okay? They're not leaking that shit. They're not, okay? So we can get into whether or not what they filed in their report to the league is accurate. If you want to say that, you're saying, well, they're not telling the truth what they said to the league, okay? Because I'm telling you what was leaked is out of that report. I'm telling you that, okay? It's obvious, okay? Report went into the league, and now stuff of that is being leaked. It does not benefit them to leak it. They don't want this stuff out there. And I'm just saying, use your brain about that. I don't even understand why either they're not going to suspend him again for that 21 hours. They've already suspended him.
yeah,
That is the suspension that's already happened. The way they would suspend him again is if they tell him to come and play and he refuses to play, or he
right.
takes his ball and runs to the corner. That'll be a little bit harder to prove, the second part. But that's their justification. And that's not the only part, by the way. There's lots of parts to it. But those are their justifications for the 7-game suspension they have already levied. They know they can't continue to suspend him without pay for that. Okay, so that's where it's at. Do you think he'll play after this? I would. If I want my money, I'd come back and I'd play.
Yeah.
Chris Greer is leaking this info. I ran into Chris Greer at the
Greer.
Best Buy in Pines the other day. So if you want to
Yeah.
ask Chris Greer a question, my friend manages that one. So go check it out. You can well, I didn't run into him, but I know he was there. So just go hang out at the Best Buy in Pines and buy something that'll help my friend out. You can ask Chris Greer anything you want about the
I
offensive
can't
line.
wait to see what moves Chris Greer is going to make, for all these great moves for the long-term future of the franchise. Now that we know he's, on a 1-year audition to keep his job, I'm sure he would not, sacrifice the better good of the franchise to keep his job. Another GMs would never do anything like that, Ethan. So
No,
I'm sure he's only thinking of the good of the organization right now.
I'll leave that one alone. That's a better question, J. Bill 845. That's a greater question. Well, 21 Alex, the Heat would argue that he forced them into an untenable situation
Yeah.
by not running the plays that Spo was calling, which is also part of that report. And that they think they can document. So there you go. All right. Anyway, Alex, appreciate it. Prize picks, use the code 5, get your $50, better edge. Use the code 5RSN, get your $20. We'll be back. None of this will resolve by Thursday, trust me. So we'll have more to talk about. Have a good one.